Welcome, Bomber fans, to the inaugural edition of the Essendon Board BigFooty Podcast. I am the Prosecutor, and joining me for this special occasion, I have Dos. Welcome, Dos.
Thank you. Welcome.
And I also have the very much alive Kong. Welcome to you, Kong.
Cheers, mate. Good to
Welcome, Kong.
And it's a special occasion for the BigFooty Essendon Board. We're joining in the coattails of other boards, and we've got our own podcast. Just to give a brief rundown on what you can expect. We're going to start off with our highlight and lowlight of the AFL week just gone. We're going to have a bit of a game review of the Gold Coast game. And due to the fact we're playing the bye this week, we're having a look at the mid-season review and a bit of a preview of the second half of the year. And then we'll finish up looking at the best and worst of Big Footy recently. And we'll also have a look at the week ahead and what we're looking forward to. Now, there's a lot to get through, so we'll get straight into it. I'll ask Dos what your highlight, low light of the AFL week has been.
A hard choice, actually. I mean, what happened to Neil was a shame to see. It was completely inevitable. And then for completely different reasons, look, the whole Stephen Milne thing is a definite low light. It's, there aren't really any winners out of that whole thing.
Definitely.
And, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds from here. But, what about you guys?
What about you, Kong?
Highlight for me, I'll try not to be too Essendon-centric, I guess, but my highlight would have been Jago O'Meara last week, or Jago O'Meara. I've posted a little bit across the board about my fascination with the guy's physique, and it's possibly verging on homoerotic, but that guy is just an absolute animal. I just cannot believe that kid is, what, is he 19, is he?
I think he's 19, yeah?
19, yeah.
Unbelievable. And it's not just, he's not, not to have a backhander, but he's not just like Magic Doll where he's, got this freak physique, but the bloke's just an unbelievable player. Like, I was watching him last week, and I've seen him on telly a few times, but watching him at the ground, he's so quick, he's so strong, his skills are just top notch, and he's a clever player as well. Like, I don't like to get too carried away, but that kid, in a few years, is just going to be such a good player.
Unbelievably elite, to use Luke Darcy.
That's the way he goes about it,
Yeah, that too.
That's it.
He's one of those blokes. It's almost hard to put it into words. I think he just screams natural football, and he will be the best player in the competition in a few years' time. I don't have much doubt about that.
He oozes class in the same way that a Trent Cotchin does.
Yeah.
If not better, as in, you can just see it. And I guess it's a privilege. It was a privilege to watch Joe Danaher and Jago O'Meara just in the same game. And I think it will be for years to come.
Yeah, Cotchin's actually the bloke I was thinking of as well, where you see a young kid, and it's not just snippets, like he's just, as I said, he's got pretty much every attribute you'd want in a young player, and he just looks amazing.
All right, and what about your low light?
My low light, I'll try to keep it on the field because I try not to get too caught up in the off-field stuff, but my low light would actually be the structure of the last three rounds. The split rounds just do my head in, and I understand that there are reasons for it, and it rotates the rest for clubs and all that sort of thing, and obviously plays a part of fixed strength, but it's quite tedious, to be honest. And I've even looked at the round coming up, and I'm struggling to find a game that I'm too interested in. I mean,
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, definitely.
The sooner this week's over, the better. I can't wait for nine games a week again.
The thing to keep in mind is that if you hark back to the VFL days, there were 12 teams. I mean, this is what it was like every week.
We're used to being pampered.
But I think it possibly was different for us from a Victorian perspective, at least, because then at least it was 12 teams that were from the state, and we probably had a little bit more interest in them. I mean, when you have GWS versus Fremantle or something like that, and no disrespect to those teams, but I think it does struggle to capture the imagination a bit for us.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say about the 6 games is I think they've been scheduled very poorly in certain circumstances. Like on a Sunday, if you've got 6 games, and I understand it's done for television reasons more than anything else, but you've got one game at 1:10 and then another game at 4:40. I mean, that's just that's just silly. And from a wide perspective, why have they got rid of the 2:10 game on a Sunday? In favour of 3:20.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fixturing is one of my biggest annoyances with the AFL in general, and it particularly becomes apparent in a round like this.
Yeah, look, for my highlight, I'm going to have to really, I'll go with the same sort of theme. Like, I'm looking forward to this round being over. There's not that many exciting games I'll watch tonight out of interest, and I'll probably hope for a Hawthorn win, because realistically, for Essendon...
Oh, gee, that's nasty, mate. You got for Essendon. Who's going on?
Yeah, well, obviously that'll be my low light. I'm going for Hawthorn. So,
yeah.
But
a massive low light.
On that, I think I need a bit of positivity in me. And on the weekend, the Bombers helped deliver that with we got a 43-point win over the Gold Coast, 7-13-115, plays 11-6-72. Brendan Goddard started for the Bombers with 38 touches, which was a career high, while young prodigy Joe Danaher kicked 3 goals in the first 3 of his career, as he impressed in a first-half display that left the mouths watering of Essendon supporters all around the country. Michael Hurley went off at the end with yet another wrist injury, and the Essendon Football Club's confident that he'll be back for the West Coast Eagles. So how did we see the game, guys?
Look, it was a professional win. I think there are certainly some parts of the play that did annoy me. But look, I thought the defence was very good. Even if the defensive running wasn't as good. Joe was a massive highlight. And Goddard, it was his best game for the club. So it was a solid performance, and given that it was a danger game going in, and I think that's a fair enough statement. I think it was a danger game.
Yep, definitely.
Look, I don't think you could have asked for a lot more. 43-point win, it's solid and gives you a little percentage boost. And now we've got the week off, so no, I was pretty happy with it overall.
Our inability to stop opposition from rebounding it outside of our own 50 is a big concern for me. Gold Coast did it in patches, as they do, but as you'd expect, they couldn't really, do it for 4 quarters. But as we saw against Geelong and Sydney, with those very good sides, they're going to do it, and I'd say that cost us the Geelong game. Our inability to shut down their rebound, particularly as that's such a strength of theirs, but I don't know if it's too much of a focus from the coaches and the players on purely accumulating inside 50s. If that's getting them distracted, or what the issue is.
Yeah.
But we're just getting killed on the rebound, and Sydney did it as well. And Malcheski and McVeigh's have a field day against us, and that's going to hurt us. Assuming we do play in finals, the really good sides are going to they'll know that's the weakness of Essendon.
It's probably no coincidence. I mean, Sydney and Geelong are probably just about the 2 best rebounding sides in the competition, and I think we're always going to struggle against those 2 sides, particularly as long as we have that inefficiency going forward. There's just the number of inside 50s relative to how many goals we score is it's still a problem, and it does need to be fixed. I'm not sure exactly what the answer is.
See, we've done this a few times over the past couple of years, where we've been able to generate a really high amount of inside 50s, and especially the Sydney game last year.
Yes.
Where we set a record actually for the most amount of inside 50s for a loss, and we just struggle to really convert. And I think that's what we really need for Danaher. Is we've seen it in the VFL, and we've got glimpses already, but what we really need is a key position forward who can generate these shots on goal almost at will. See, we don't really get that from Hurley. We normally just get, the couple of goals a game, and he presents up the ground. Whereas I think Danaher really does open up this forward line to bring in someone we can actually kick it to and can kick, a bag of goals, which is a play I think we need right now.
Yeah, I mean, Hurley is struggling with his marking. That's the end of it. Very simple fact, he's struggling with his marking, and as long as he's struggling with his marking, we are going to struggle to have that target. And if we're not there at the drop of the ball, and obviously not going to be all the time, then they're going to get easy rebound.
So then, with Hurley not being able to provide that marking target, do we move Jake Carlisle to the forward line perhaps and see if he can get a partnership working with Danaher?
Personally, I'm not a big fan of Carlisle going forward for long term or for an entire game. I think what he's producing down back is far too valuable. I wouldn't want to rob the back line of that. But as we've obviously seen twice this year already, one is the Carlton game, the switch between him and Hurley, and it's obviously something we can do during games if it's required, but as great as he is, or great a mark as Carlisle is, I wouldn't want to take him out of the back line, but that's just me.
Oh, I'm in complete agreement with that. Carlisle is just too good in the back line. But the dilemma is that I think Hurley's better in the back line too.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to fix.
Do we then look at perhaps, because I don't know about you two, but I'd say Fletcher might not go on past this year.
I'm starting to agree with that.
Yeah, the signs are there that, he's starting, not so much slow down, but the body's starting to catch up with him. And maybe it'd be best if Hurley moved down back, allowing Hooker to be that genuine, third tall that Fletcher had been in previous years, and which would allow maybe a Gumbleton-Danaher setup, because, Gumbleton's effective when he comes into the side. He manages to get multiple goals, generally, when he does come in. So perhaps he's maybe the better option as a centre-half forward with Hurley and Carlisle both back. But the coaching staff seem to disagree at this stage, but
yeah,
it might be an option.
It's definitely an option. I'm a big fan of Hurley forward for the time being. I think what he provides is a constant target, and he's constantly involved in play, even if he's not getting his hands on it, even if he's not laying a tackle. He's the difference between him being there and not, I notice a lot of games, but I don't really know what the solution is. So perhaps it is Gumbleton if his body is ready to stand up. He's, as you said, he's effective. Well, he has been for the last 12 months or so since he's come back in. He's good for 2 to 4 goals a game, which sort of catches me off guard a little bit because, with the exception of I think the St Kilda game this year and the Hawthorn game last year, I don't particularly notice him that often. He just sort of seems to be one of those players that he makes the most of his opportunities, and that's obviously something we need to do because we're bombarding our forward line, but the delivery of to the forwards isn't good enough at the moment, and the forwards that we do have there aren't able to make the most of their opportunity. So maybe that is something that Gumbleton does bring to the forward line. So perhaps you're right.
And also just quickly with Fletcher, the other thing there is that if he what he does, I think will in large part determine what happens to Tate Pears too.
I agree.
And look, it's a difficult question, and there probably isn't a right or wrong answer in some ways. But do you have Fletcher around for one more year playing very well as he always does? But having Tate go back to Perth or go somewhere else, and then when Fletcher retires, then we don't have that quality sort of medium rebounding defender. With medium rebounding defender, we've got Hibbert obviously, and Dempsey to provide the dash as well. But Pears has got that versatility, being 6 foot 3.5, 6'4", whatever it is.
I think he's 190, 192.
192 or 193, I think. Yeah, he's about 192. Yeah, I think 192. He's just that size, and from what I saw against Gold Coast, that was Pears' best game in probably since about 2010.
Yeah,
I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah, he had genuine confidence in himself.
Yep. And he's just one of those. He's one of those guys. I'm probably fairly well known as being a big Pears fan. I'd really hate to lose him.
Yeah, likewise.
I'd really hate to lose him. But I have a feeling if Fletcher stays on, we may. And I don't know, there's no right or wrong answer to that, really.
Essendon find themselves at the bye, 9-3, 3 losses coming to Geelong at Etihad Stadium, to Sydney at the SCG, and to the Brisbane Lions at Etihad Stadium. Obviously, it's same position we found ourselves in at this point last year. How do we see this year compared to last year, and is there improvement there, or how do you see it?
I definitely see an improvement on last year.
Yep.
As you said, we're in basically an identical situation, but particularly the first 6 weeks of this season, I was very impressed with. To contradict myself a little bit, I was very impressed with our defensive efforts the first 6 weeks, and it was an intensity over the entire ground. It's not something that I saw a hell of a lot in 2012. I think I saw it in the West Coast game at the Dome. That was incredible last year. Other than that, I didn't see too many games where for 4 quarters we were hungrier than the opposition, and our defensive efforts were we're up there with the likes of Collingwood and Geelong. So for the first probably 6 weeks this year, I think that was there. Particularly to be able to stand up against Fremantle in round 3, that really impressed me, because I see them as the best defensive side in the league.
So I think that was a real character building game too.
Massive. So I think we've definitely improved on last year. The lack of injuries, no Essendon supporters need to be reminded of the last few years. So far this year, that's massive going into the second half. We've actually got basically our entire squad to choose from.
Yeah.
That in theory will hold us in much better stead, and Herd's harped on a lot about that. So I'm pretty optimistic, but at the same time I am a little bit scarred from last year, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I've had a few mates ask me about that, and I just keep reminding them were we 8-1 last year?
Well, 8-1, and I think we ended up 9-3 at this point. Same as last year, because we got to, might have even been 9-2. But so same kind of point last year, except I think we've had better quality wins this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I guess the other aspect to the first half of the season that we can't really ignore is the investigation with Asada and the ACC. The club obviously is trying to downplay just how much of an effect it is having on the players, and they've given glimpses here and there just on the toll it is taking, but it's got to have such a massive effect on their mindset, like not so much on the game day, because no doubt when they run out onto the field, they're 100% concentrating on what they're doing, but that doesn't mean, the night before they're not sleeping properly or something like that. Like, it has to have had an effect on them, and undoubtedly they've had to question their trust in the club and the coaches. And with the interviews finished and all that sort of stuff, it leaves me a bit optimistic, actually, that we can have a big second half of the year. And I'm immensely proud of this team that they've done so well in this half of the year, considering all the weight that's been on their shoulders. Because, you look at teams like Melbourne, who have almost capitulated on a scale that I've never seen personally before. And we've seemed to go in the opposite direction. And for that, you can only be proud of the team and hope that they can use this as a building base for bigger and better things.
Yeah, the Essendon of 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer, I don't think they would have handled it the way we have in 2013. I think there's been a lot of mental fragility about our club over the last probably 5 to 10 years, and I think, as you said, just to reiterate what you've said, the way we've responded is amazing. It's nothing short of amazing.
I think we've had wins.
It appears to have united them.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is, it's a credit to them, really.
Yeah.
As Prosecutor said, it'd be a pretty stressful process to have to go through, and that's understating it. It would be a very stressful process. Just the uncertainty and the constant speculation and the innuendo, and I have nothing but admiration for the players for the way they've dealt with it.
I think you mentioned fragility, Kong, like as in previous years that we've been mentally fragile. However, I think what's really been telling this year is that in previous years, sure, we might have won the Freo game, but we wouldn't back it up the next week and then the week after. Whereas we came out against St Kilda and put in a really clinical performance, and then we backed it up again on Anzac Day. We had a bit of a down patch between round 6 and 8, but the impressive thing is that, you know, we've stabilised ourselves and we're like a team on the mission rather than, you know, a team that goes out to win one game and is proud of their efforts and then, you know, screws it all up the next week.
Sets themselves as the big dog, takes them down, and then loses to Melbourne the next week or something. Yeah.
Exactly, and I mean, I don't think any Essendon supporter was confident with how the season was going to play out when we lost to Brisbane. Because I mean, in the 4 weeks since then, we've had Richmond, Sydney, Carlton, and Gold Coast. So to come out of that stretch, you know, 3 and 4,
3 out of 4, yeah.
It's a real credit to the team, and it just leaves you with so much hope going into the second half of the season that, you know, this team has finally made the grade. So we'll move on to the second half of the season. We've had a look at, you know, the first half. So coming up, we have West Coast at Patterson Stadium, Port Adelaide at Etihad Stadium, the Bulldogs at Etihad Stadium, the Giants at Skoda Stadium, Hawthorn at Etihad Stadium, Collingwood at the MCG, West Coast at Etihad Stadium, North Melbourne at Etihad Stadium, Carlton at the MCG, and then a blockbuster in round 23 against Richmond, which could potentially decide Richmond's fate going into finals. So when I look at this draw, I see 3 games coming up in the next 4 that we should, if we're the team that we think we are now, we should win them, which would take us to 12 wins. And I don't think 13 wins has ever missed out on finals, and I don't think that will this year. So I'd say that we're 1 win away from outside of Giants, Bulldogs and Port Adelaide from cementing a spot in the 8, which would be exciting because that would give us about a 6-week stretch to really make an assault on the home final.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, look,
sorry, I'll leave it to you, Dos.
The next 3 or 4 weeks are a good platform to set up for our assault, you know, into the last 6 weeks of the season and then into finals. I mean, at the very least, West Coast at Subi is a tough game. I mean, we haven't beaten them there since 2001, and that says a fair bit about what a tough trip it is. If we can break that hoodoo, that would be an enormous confidence booster. And then if we're serious, we shouldn't drop any of Port, Dogs or GWS. That's a fairly golden stretch, really.
It's no disrespect to those teams, but if we're a team that should be finishing 5th around that sort of mark, they're games we really should be capitalising on.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at one stage earlier in the season when Port were going a little bit better, I was, a little bit worried about the Port game, but I know they did win last up, but they do seem to have lost that zip from earlier in the year. And the Dogs, I think I think they'll be good in a few years' time, maybe 2 or 3 years. But for the moment, we're a clearly much better side. And that should be a win every day of the week. And GWS, as is their want, they'll probably stick with us for a half. But they do struggle to maintain the intensity for an entire game, and that's to be completely expected from what is essentially mostly a bunch of kids. And we really should win that. So, West Coast is a big challenge to the next 4, I think. If we can win West Coast, and then the others will be 13-3. And that really sets up an assault for the last 6. And, it's a tough 6 games to finish with. But, we've beaten Collingwood already. We've beaten Richmond. We just beat Carlton. Playing West Coast again. At Etihad and West Coast. In Melbourne, not so sure about them here. I'm fairly optimistic about where it's going.
Yeah, because I look at those last 6 games, and apart from Hawthorn and arguably Collingwood at their best, which they aren't at the moment, they're all teams that are around about where we are or just a bit below. So while it's a difficult stretch, it's not too difficult. It's a good barometer heading into finals, and I think it would really tell us a lot about Essendon over a full season, because obviously the big criticism on us has been our inability to play, 2 halves of the season.
Yep.
So we have a perfect opportunity here to not only set up our finals campaign, but also beat these teams around us and really cement our spot amongst the league.
Yeah, to use a cliche, our faith in our own hands going into the second half. As you guys have said, every single one of them is winnable and losable, the final 6 games. They're the sort of games where in the past you're never really quite sure what to expect, because I guess due to immaturity of our side or our club as a whole, we can either get ourselves up the Carlton, or we might drop one to North or whatever it is. So those last 6 games they'll give us a very good idea of just how good our side is from this day forth, and that includes not only ability but mental capacity to get up each week. So it'll be a huge final 6 weeks of the year.
Well, I guess we've looked at the games. So who are the players who are going to stand up, though? I think we've talked about Joe Danaher already, and we don't want to put too much pressure on the kid. I mean, he is a kid. We talked about his ability to generate scoring shots, and we also touched on our inability to capitalise on our inside 50s. I think Joe Danaher is going to be a really vital cog structurally, and his ability to generate scoring shots, which he seems to have, which is fantastic for us. I think he's going to actually be a really key component for how our team performs for the rest of the year.
Yeah, look, I can see that. I guess the unknown at this point is that he is still a kid.
Yeah, definitely.
He may well have a flat spot at some point, and the drama queens will come out and probably start calling him overrated. And all sorts of
he's
things.
already.
But, the fact is, he's a kid, and he will have down spots every now and then.
Yeah.
We're lucky that if he does have one of those spots and needs a bit of a spell in the VFL, we have Gumbleton who can come in and do a decent job.
Yeah.
At least for this season.
We've already had
him beyond then is another question, but for this season at least we've got him to come in if Joe needs a rest, which he may well do.
I think the other player that I think we really need to look at in our forward line is Stuart Cramery. Now he's been he's treading water, but he's still impacting the scoreboard. He's leading our goal kicking for about, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm going to say 24 goals. So he's hitting the scoreboard, but he's not having that impact he's had in previous years. And if he can really find that, ground game and that contested marking game that's sort of eluded him this year, here's another cog in that forward line that could really make it effective and take us from, a 5th to 6th side to potentially, knocking on the door of top 4. And he's just such a vital cog that I hope we don't lose him. I hope we sign him. That's obviously priority 1.
Yeah.
But if we can get his form back up, he can do immeasurable things for this team.
He's an enigma, isn't he?
He is.
He has the potential to kick 6 goals as he did on Merritt and Brisbane last year. He can really tear a game apart. He did against Carlton last year as well, and then he can sort of just float through patches of a year. And I don't know whether it's if he is carrying a niggle like he did. It's sort of mirroring last year a little bit. Like he started the season really strongly, and then he just sort of floats through. And it's not that he's not terrible, but he just sort of.
He just does enough. He doesn't really excel.
Yeah, he's taking up the spot. He might kick his 1 or 2 goals, but I'm not sure what it is, but he sort of gets to this point in the season where he's just sort of, this sounds quite negative, I guess, but he's just sort of there, and I'm really hoping it's just, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little bit carried away, but I'm hoping it's just a few weeks where he's doing it, because last week, in the second half in particular, he did sort of lift his intensity a lot. He pushed up the ground a lot more, which is a massive strength of his, obviously being he's essentially a key forward, but he has the tank to go up the ground, and that's where he seems to hurt a lot of his opponents. So to build back on... Oh, sorry, mate.
Oh, no, you finished, mate.
I was just going to say, so on the likes of Merritt, where he's obviously, a huge man, but he can't cover the ground that Cramery can, I think that's where he really hurts the opposition. But when he's sort of hindered a little bit with his leg injury he had last year and whatever he might be carrying at the moment, that sort of limits his ability to push up the ground, and that's what we need him doing. So I'm hoping he can continue to return to doing that, because it makes a huge difference.
I think he really suffers from playing as a second key tall. I think he's best suited to... I mean, he's Joe Watson and nearly Dyson Heppel are the same height or taller than him. He's not a genuine key second tall, because when I think of that, I think of, Jared Roughhead, Jack Darling, all these type of players. I don't think of Stuart Crammery. It seems like our coaching staff has this fascination of the one key forward, Stuart Crammery, and the resting ruckman, where I'd like to see a true centre half forward, full forward, like a Hurley Danaher with Crammery as a sort of a lead up forward.
I think one of the frustrations with Crammery is he's probably one of the best athletes at the club, and is almost certainly one of the strongest. If you go by his bench press results and the like.
Yep.
But he just sometimes he's not. He doesn't look like he's using his strengths to his advantage, does it? And as Kong said, that may well be more through injury than lack of effort. But it can be frustrating for a supporter to see that.
Yeah.
But when he has an on day, he can absolutely tear a team apart.
He's got the ability. It's just
Carlton last year at the MCG.
Yeah.
He kicked 5 goals, 7, and he probably could have kicked 10.
He kicked 1 or 2 out in the full too. So it was.
He did. He kicked 5 goals, 7, and one or 2 out in the full. He could have easily had 10 that day. It was probably the most dominant performance from an Essendon forward I've actually seen in quite a while. And against a decent team anyway. I'm not really counting the Melbourne game this year, because they just weren't even there that night.
Yeah.
Don't forget Reamers against Gold Coast last year.
I love how people use I love how people use Kyle Reamers as an example. It's like, Kyle Reamers kicked 8 goals against the Gold Coast. Anyone can do it. Yet there's only 2 or 3 who've actually done it, and Kyle frickin' Reamers did it.
Was it Gold Coast that Tom Lynch kicked 10 again?
GWS, I think.
GWS. Okay. Yeah.
So, we'll move on from Crammery. I think we've said all that we can really say about that. There's 2 other players I had in mind going into the end of the season who I think can play, obviously, an important part. The first one I think we need to discuss is Tom Bellchambers, because his position in the side sort of, it's under scrutiny at the moment. Obviously, he's given a rest and he's played VFL. And while he wasn't playing badly, I didn't think he really warranted being dropped. So I don't know where you two see him, but I saw him in our best 22, and I thought he was performing at a standard that was, AFL level worthy. But obviously the coaches disagree.
I still see him as our best ruckman. I think Ryder's a better overall footballer because he's so versatile, and he's obviously better at covering the ground. But purely as a ruckman, I think Bellchambers is our best, and I think he still has a fair bit of improvement in him. I'm a massive fan of Bellchambers. And I agree with you. His start to the year I thought was quite good. I think he was probably in the top handful of ruckmen in the league that I saw, at least. But yeah, those last probably 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, he did drop off a little bit. He didn't disgrace himself by any means, but
definitely did drop off. Yeah,
it did.
The thing, I reckon he was dropped as much for team balance as for outright poor form. I mean, his form did dip, but I think there was a recognition that perhaps there were aspects of the structure that just weren't quite working, and having 2 ruckmen, and given that he just wasn't doing that much when he went forward, I think that was one of the problems.
Yeah, well, as you said, like at the start of the year, he did seem to be. He'd improved his marking up forward quite a lot. His kicking quite reliable, but the last few weeks he wasn't able to do that when he did go forward, and I think our side really needs that for the second ruckman to effectively be a key forward, because to tie back into a Crameri discussion, while I see Crameri as a key forward, I agree that he's probably more dangerous as a third tall, and so we essentially do rely on that second ruckman being a key forward, and when that output dropped, then we're essentially, I wouldn't say we're a man down, but our performance relies so heavily on it. So there's noticeably been a change in the coach's not philosophy. I don't want to sound too but I think there's been a definite change in how they've set up the last few weeks with going with Danaher purely as another key forward that can chip in. So yeah, you're right. It'll be interesting to see whether that is the long-term strategy, and I guess this week against West Coast, next week against West Coast will be a pretty good indication, because you're coming up against two very good ruckmen. So
I'd be very surprised if he doesn't play against West Coast.
Yep.
What would they do with Danaher? Do you think they'll rest him or
from the quotes coming from Hurd, I'd suggest they'd play him. They seem to be of the, he's performing obviously at a high standard. Well, he did certainly in that first half. And I think Hurd was saying that, they're not thinking of dropping him anytime soon. So, because they want to get as much games into him as possible. And he's obviously ready. I think he demonstrated that on Saturday. So I think we'll play with a 200 plus centimetre, or Carlisle's 200 centimetres plus. So I think we'll play with the two ruckmen and Danaher, and I think we'll play Danaher as a strictly key forward, which I think is best, because I think Danaher he's not physically yet capable of effectively playing in the ruck.
Yeah.
So,
well, do we think that West Coast is a team that you could possibly go a little bit taller against? Because you look at guys who are going to. Fletcher, assuming he's picked, he has to come in for someone, and Pears is probably the one who will go out, despite how good he was.
Yep.
And if you're going to fit Bell Chambers in, then on the surface you might say it looks a bit top heavy. So I guess it's a question of how tall they want to go, and who else would make way. It's just. I don't know. It's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the last player I was going to bring up as well, Tate Pears. Now, we spoke with Fletcher before how he was seemingly, his body's starting to deteriorate. Not rapidly, but, he can't do the things that maybe he could have once done consistently. But I think one of the things we've been relying on with Fletcher this year is to take a small forward. Like, he took Eddie Betts against Carlton, and he took Hayden Ballantyne versus Fremantle. Could Tate Pears be that player who can provide that sort of foil to Bagley and take that sort of second or third small forward? Because at the moment, we don't really have a genuine matchup to combat teams who can run this small forward line.
I think Pears is absolutely is better suited to playing on medium or small forwards. From what we've seen in recent times, he just isn't quite. It's either that he's just not big enough, or that he doesn't have the body strength or the confidence in himself in a contest. I think we saw that the Hulk. Yeah. He's just not. Cameron monstered him.
Yeah, exactly.
He absolutely monstered him.
Yeah.
Pears seems to play his best footy when he's on medium or small forward. That's a fairly simple fact at the moment, at least.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I'd say, again, similar to Crameri, I see Pears as capable as a key defender. But for our side going forward, I think he's perfect as a medium to small defender. And the St Kilda game actually surprised me a lot, because Pears ran with Sard and Malera a little bit, sort of rotated, and I'm forgetting which one he played on for the most part, but whoever it was that he was on for that game, that he just kept up with him, and that's something we touched on earlier, his mobility. It's just it's back, and if he can play on those sort of speedy forwards, then that's massive for us. He can essentially play on, well, short of a resting ruckman like Tippett or not the resting ruckman for the Giants, and he's really able to fill any position in that back line, and that's such an asset for any side to have.
Yeah.
All right. Now we'll have a look at what's going on around Big Footy. So this is our chance for, to say what posters you're liking lately, what quality they've produced, and also it's a chance to point out something that you haven't liked, what threads you haven't liked, what posts you have liked, all those sort of things. So I'll kick it off with a bit of an example to really kickstart the conversation. I'm going to give kudos to a Richmond supporter, RFC Tiger 74.
Very good poster.
Yes. For those of you who haven't seen, I think Kong, you might be one, on the ASADA sub-forum on the main board, RFC Tiger 74 has been one of the few opposition supporters who's been willing to look at it in an impartial manner, who's willing to wait for due process, and hasn't been sucked into the Caroline Wilson sort of vitriol of trying to get Hurd sacked or, mass sackings of a lynch mob. So I want to give kudos to him, and I think he's proven himself to be a real quality poster and one that I'd be willing to listen to whenever he posts.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. He's and he's had to put up with a bit of. He was, I sort of flit in and out and read those boards sometimes. I've given up responding a long time ago, but he's had to put up with more than one call of, sort of, are you a closet Essendon supporter and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's just this sort of pack mentality that develops in these situations is it's really quite amusing. And he has been genuinely impartial. I mean, he has criticised Essendon sharply at times in that debate, and that's fair enough because clearly some things happened which Essendon could have done a hell of a lot better.
Exactly.
And he's been willing to call them out on that, and even been willing to say, that certain people possibly should go. But all the more melodramatic stuff he has managed to completely stay out of, which I've admired him for that. I think he's been very good. He's been very good all the way through.
Yeah.
Too.
And as a bit of a on the constructive criticism side, I'm going to mention he's a big footy favourite, but Plugger 35. His St Kilda umpiring conspiracies are well known. However, what I'd say to him, he's become reliant on his free kick differential as his key piece of evidence. I'd suggest to him though that the free kick differential doesn't take into effect context. So St Kilda might be negative 47, I think it was, in the free kick count. But that's not to say that those free kicks are necessarily wrong. Nor
It's such a misleading stuff.
Exactly.
It really is.
So and it's not a competition where the free kicks are meant to be equal. Sure, they might balance out, with probability that between the league they'll balance out. But I think to say that because St Kilda have negative 47 in the free kick differential, I don't think that's quite telling the full story, and I don't think that's proof of anything.
Look, with Plugger, I have sort of oscillated between not knowing whether he's actually serious or whether he's just taking the piss and is doing it as one long comedy routine. But I'm starting to come around to the view that he actually is.
He is.
And I find it pretty sad, to be honest. This idea that there's actually a conspiracy against a team, in terms of umpiring. I mean, it is just absurd.
I think it's a classic example of confirmation bias as well. No doubt that St Kilda, well, obviously in the West Coast game in the fourth quarter, they had some decisions that went against them, and ultimately it was it cost them in the game. That I don't think people can deny that. But I think with the confirmation bias, though, it's got to the point where him and some other St Kilda supporters are actively looking for things to be aggrieved about when it comes to umpiring.
For sure.
As opposed to, sitting back and looking at it from a neutral perspective and saying, yep, I can see why it's paid. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can see, that I can see where the umpire's coming from. So what about you two? What's caught your interest on Big Footy over the last week or two?
Generally don't venture outside the Essendon board too much these days. That's been the case for probably a year or two, and over the last 3 or 4 months, that's how me. I don't visit the main board at all, really. But so I can't really speak about our board, but what I would say is...
Essendon board as well, as in Big Footy wide, so, yeah.
I'm a big fan of the non-Essendon thread, or threads.
Yep.
What I enjoy about them is it's obviously generally posted by some users, but the conversation, with the exception of talk on a particular North Melbourne club, with the exception of them, whenever...
A particular North Melbourne club.
Yeah, I hope that narrative...
Yeah, I think it...
but with the exception of that topic, I really enjoy the conversation in that thread because it's there's no real bias towards any other clubs, and it's just a good conversation that goes back and forth, and there's no point to prove from any particular posters, and there's generally no posters of particular clubs coming to intervene or to get defensive or things like that. And I really enjoy talking about other clubs because often when you're talking about your own club, your judgment's clouded a little bit, and I think that applies to most people, and that's fair enough. But yeah, I enjoyed that thread. The other thing I was going to say is it kind of ties in what you guys were saying about constructive criticism. What I like, particularly over the last few months on the Essendon board, is the standard of posting in the player watch threads. I think they've improved a heck of a lot because, there's always going to be the odd circle jerk, as you see with Joe Danaher, and although most of that's tongue-in-cheek, but I think what's improved is there's a lot more constructive criticism of players, and that's not just all glowing endorsements of players. There's things like, as has crept into discussion lately, there's the criticism for Zaharakis' defensive efforts and things like that. And
yeah,
Crammery as well.
That improves the standard of posting as a board as a whole, and it maybe opens the eyes of some posters that perhaps wouldn't have come across that. And that's the beauty of Big Footy, is you've got so much more in-depth discussion, so you focus on things that you wouldn't really think about if you were just watching it at home, or if you were just reading the so-called opinions of Muppets in the media. So I think that's I'm really enjoying those threads at the moment as well.
Yep. All right, what about you, Dos?
Probably 90% of my time these days I probably spend on the side, at least I spend on the Essendon board as well. I'd echo what Con was saying about the non-Essendon thread. I think it's a very it's a diverse thread, and there's always a good breadth of opinions in there. And it is interesting, to go in there, because sometimes I think team boards have the potential to become a bit of an echo chamber sometimes. That's one of the reasons why I always welcome opposition supporters coming in, as long as they're constructive and willing to have a decent chat. That's one of the reasons I like that. And the non-Essendon thread it's varied, and it is interesting. And one of the things outside the Essendon board, I do go to the main board occasionally, and one of the phenomenons that I've noticed, which just, it's completely unsurprising, but it's just ridiculous, is in any number of threads where an Essendon supporter will give an opinion on something, and it somehow gets turned around into, it'll become about the Asada and drugs again, and there's nothing that pisses me off more on the site than posters getting attacked, not because of what they've said, but because of the club they support.
The good old,
annoys me to tears. I can't stand it. I can't remember any examples off the top of my head, but I've seen it quite a few times, and
it's a bit like Melbourne supporters when they try to say something about drafting, and then someone will say, yeah, a Melbourne supporter can't talk. Yeah, what would a Melbourne supporter know about it? It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just painting, sort of tarring all with the same brush, and, it's just an absolute cop-out of actually having a decent discussion.
Yep.
And, you know, I mean, that might sound a bit sort of, like sort of snobbish, but if you can't actually address the content of someone's point or argument, and you just resort to attacking their team, then why even bother? Right?
Says more about them as well.
It really does. Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. So before we wrap up, what are we looking forward to this weekend? You want to go first, Dos?
Yeah, sure. Well, for one thing, as much as we were talking earlier about the downsides of having only 6 games in a weekend, I'm sort of not minding the fact that we actually have a weekend off the sort of the stress of being a supporter. Yeah, could go well.
Yep. All right. What about you, Kong? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I'm not really overly enthused about too many games, but I've got a bit of an interest in tonight's game. I've got a bit of a fascination with West Coast. I love watching them play generally. Hawthorn are quite an attractive side to watch as well. So I think the game, even if it's 4 or 5 goal wins for Hawthorn, which is what I'm expecting, I think it'll be a good style and standard of game to watch. So
yep.
I'm looking forward to that, and both sides have some good players to watch, I guess.
I'm actually looking forward to that Fremantle North game. I reckon North will give them a fair shake, and I think North aren't a terrible team, and I reckon it's probably going to be the game of the round, to be honest, because I don't expect West Coast to get close to Hawthorn. And obviously St Kilda and Melbourne has some interest as well, but I think North Melbourne and Fremantle will be the quality game of the round.
Yep.
In any case, I think that's all about we have time for. So I'd like to thank Dos and Kong for joining us on our first podcast. And hopefully you listeners enjoy it, and we can have more podcasts in the future where we have, a rotating panel. We can have more people come in and get a wide collection of thoughts on the Essendon board. But for now, that's all we've got for this week. I'm the Prosecutor.
I'll just quickly say something, guys,
okay.
by the way,
Dos
from Dos. First week we've tried this. It's obviously a little bit rusty. No doubt the quality and flow of discussion will improve in weeks to come. I mean, today's been pretty fun.
Don't judge us now.
We're still complete amateurs at this.
Yep.
I've certainly had fun doing it, and I hope everyone has had fun listening.
Yep. Alrighty. So with that note, we'll say goodbye and see the Bombers fly.